When you exert your true self in a narcissistic relationship, when you attempt to create any kind of balance in it, they will find a way to shut that down. And shaming you is a surefire way to do that. You can go ahead and set those boundaries if you wish, but be prepared to be told that you are the one with the problem. Been talking about fawning because fawning is such an important thing to understand narcissistic relationships. So sometimes as you learn about fawning and you do the work of the trauma work and you connect to yourself somatically, you may actually find that you're not fawning as much. But when you stop fawning, you might find that you're being called difficult. So let's take that on. So developing healthy assertiveness is very difficult for survivors of narcissistic abuse. You may have even had it before the relationship, that healthy assertiveness, but then years of having any needs shamed, any asks being viewed as excessive, well, that's bad enough. If you were raised with a narcissistic parent, you may have also developed a fawn response in the face of the subjugations and the invalidations that were happening in your relationship with your parent. The fawn response is observed, manifested, but observed, when a person behaves in a manner in which it's almost as though you are trying to win the narcissistic person over, be what they want you to be, sort of appease them, soothe them. The fawn response is a trauma and a safety response. It's designed to maintain a connection with the narcissistic or harmful caregiver or parent or adult. Fawning is not a conscious process. So when people characterize fawning as being seductive or manipulative, that is patently untrue. It is a sympathetic nervous system level response. It is meant to make us safe. However, many people will sometimes experience shame because they have a fawn response with narcissistic parents and with other people throughout their lives. It's as though people who are having this fawn response feel somehow complicit in the narcissistic person's behavior. And I say this as someone who has a lot of a fawn response in me. And interestingly, as I promote the book, I will sometimes be met, even in an online event, certainly in person, when people are asking me lots of questions. But I sometimes feel compelled to give in when a group of people is around me and asking questions and answer the questions of the person first who feels the most threatening to me. I don't know what makes them threatened. Maybe they're entitled. Maybe it's something about the expression on their face. But after it happens, I'm incensed at myself afterwards because that is precisely the person I did not want to yield to, or maybe not even get to their question. I can even feel the physiological sensation that compels that fawn in me. And then by engaging in that fawn response, it's sort of me again, behaving in line with that sympathetic nervous system call. The fawn response can be another driver in that whole agreeableness paradox I recently talked about in another video. Fawners by nature can seem accommodating, yielding, and that they will, in a way it seems like they're trying to be engaging and be the best possible supply. Now, breaking out of the fawn response is no small task, and stay tuned to that because my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Ingrid Clayton, has a book coming out about precisely this issue, which is going to be quite amazing. But to break out of the fawn response is literally an act of sympathetic nervous system defiance. It's about taking an uncomfortable path, in essence, not fawning. And here's the problem, though. You do the work, you get the therapy, but when you slowly stop fawning, especially when the people around you are accustomed to it, and even if they're not narcissistic, and then you switch it up and actually make appropriate asks, you make your needs known, you ask people to do a job that they were supposed to do, or make a deadline, or answer a question you asked, just getting out of the fawn, narcissistic recovery, I can't make a need known headspace is big enough to actually make the ask. But something that I am seeing happen to people is that when they make the ask, they're being branded as difficult, right? And this is one of the most painful and setbacky things that can happen to a survivor, especially to somebody who's traditionally been a fawner. And I have to say that as I went through the process of 6 months of assiduously promoting a book that improbably ended up getting recognized, that in a strange way only happened because I had to do the work and actually do the work of keeping that fawn response in check. And I found myself at times having to be demanding. I would feel sick to my stomach when I made these asks of people in terms of promoting the book, and would afterwards ruminate and ask myself, was I wrong? Should I not have done that? Maybe I wasn't nice enough, and on and on and on. But the hardest part wasn't just the asking. It was when I was treated as though I was being unreasonable and difficult. I felt exhausted all the time for those months, because just making the ask was hard enough. But to then be called or treated as though I was difficult was very tough. And then, like any good self-doubter, I would take those emails and text to other people and say, am I wrong with what I asked? Did I do something wrong? And bless many of these patient people around me, they would say, not at all. You should have asked for more. So the fawner's fear, in many ways, is to be called or be characterized as difficult. Because to be called or characterized as difficult, it carries with it a massive opportunity cost. And that opportunity cost is to lose attachments and connections and relationships and love. It's really to be abandoned, and those are very high stakes. So that's when we enter catch-22 territory. Fawners feel shame for fawning, and they wish they would have stood up for themselves, or at the very least, not fawned. So then there's no winning. If you stand up for yourself, you're labeled difficult. If you fawn, you feel shame. So those of us who are indoctrinated and learn to fawn and accommodate and never be a bother, we don't just, through our responses, make a narcissistic person's life easier. We make everyone's life easier. The fawner's easy breezy, I don't want to be a bother approach to life makes life very easy for the folks around us. And in a way, we are kept in place by the fears of what would happen if we were to make our needs known. Because invariably, if you do make your needs known, someone's going to think you're being demanding or difficult for asking very basic things, like expecting someone to do their job, or show up on time, or pay what they promised, or respond to your question. It's not as though most of you are making any kind of rock star demands. Your asks are often quite simple. But these simple asks, and the asks that come up when you are being assertive, which is often required to achieve at most jobs or careers, can seem insurmountable when you have experienced a history of narcissistic abuse. And we can often hold back on doing it when we get the pushback and the characterization of our asks, particularly if we're making an insistent or an assertive ask, as us being demanding or difficult. This sort of accommodation, the providing narcissistic supply, the going along, the being the good girl, the good guy, the good person, it's a very difficult legacy of narcissistic abuse. And people looking in at you from the outside may not peg it as such. They may praise you for being flexible and accommodating. But all of your flexibility and accommodation are often not reciprocated. And other people will have no problem doing what you ask in the name of holding their boundary, but are so used to your flexibility that they hold you to a different standard. The thought of being thought of as difficult or being branded as difficult can be very destabilizing for survivors of narcissistic abuse. Not the least of why is because it can feel gaslighty. It can raise more self-blame, more self-doubt, and even leave us wondering if we are the narcissistic ones. It can throw people backwards from their tentative attempts to advocate for themselves or to assert themselves. But we already know how the story turns out if we just sit quiet and don't do anything. If we keep ourselves silent and keep orienting to being what they want. So as my friend Ingrid said to me, when I told her that I was having the repeated experience of being told I was difficult for making some asks around book promotion and other asks I was making professionally, she said to me basically, own it. Now, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to do that, and being seen as difficult is always going to be difficult for me. But for any of you who have had that experience of being fawners and pleasers and appeasers and accommodators, who finally stretch, who ask for what you need, who reach for a dream and get shut down as difficult, remember this. Maybe this is how narcissistic people get shit done. And maybe it's time we take a page out of their playbook. But the real truth is that it is easier for folks to shut you down and characterize you as demanding, rather than to do the things that you ask of them. So, slowly but surely, you can transition out of that fawn. But be careful, because on the other side of that is when we stop fawning, is the day we get called difficult. Now, there's variance on this. Things like saying to somebody narcissistic, like, that thing you have to do, isn't that just a requirement? Or, I think everyone has to do that. Or, gosh, it seems normal that they would expect you to do that. So let me give this to you by means of an example. An example of this would be them sort of, the narcissistic person banging around angrily. I can't believe I have to waste time and take this training and take this stupid online class for my job. It is such a waste of my rather important time. I can't believe this is happening to me. I have so many things to do. Why? Why are they putting me through this? It's not fair. It's not fair that they're doing this to me. I hate them. I hate them so much. And then you might gently say to this narcissistic person, I don't know, based on what I'm reading here, it sounds like everyone at your company has to do this. Seems like a reasonable thing to say. But then they rage at you. Basically, when you gave them that feedback, it's you suggesting that the narcissistic person actually isn't that special and should have to do the things that everybody else has to do. So in a sense, what you're kind of telling them in a roundabout way is, don't be entitled. And as we all know, that's not going to work. Entitlement is one of those things that very few people will admit to. Even the most raging, asshole, arrogant, in-your-face narcissist will rarely say, hey, I'm entitled. Somehow even narcissistic people know it's not cool to be entitled. But obviously, their conduct speaks otherwise. They believe that they deserve special treatment, right? And in fact, narcissistic people frequently use just that phrase when they believe they are being treated badly. They will frequently say, I don't deserve this, or I deserve better. Okay, sure, maybe you do. The narcissistic entitlement can show up in lots of ways. Their unwillingness, for example, to wait in a line, or follow a simple rule, or have to wait for something, or even having to wait for their turn, I don't know, in traffic. At a four-way stop, I promise you, the narcissist will always believe they have the right of way. Their ego fragility means that they consistently take their half out of the middle, and those shows of dominance that they need become like a bracing or a support for their constantly crumbling egos. But this statement, hey, doesn't everyone have to do that? That kind of thing you might say to them. You may innocently, for example, be listening to a narcissist who's going on and on about how they shouldn't have to take the extra classes for a training program because I already have so much experience. Why should I have to take the stupid certificate course? Or that they shouldn't have to put in an application to get some kind of license or something renewed because they already did it once, even though everyone else has to do that. Or they shouldn't have to fill out so much paperwork for a loan because they have been working for such a long time and always pay their bills on time, even though everybody who applies for that loan has to fill out that paperwork. Again, then you will say, Again, so innocently and so logically. But doesn't everyone have to do that? Like I said, you're going to be met with the huffing and the puffing and the banging about and rage or silent treatment or sullenness or resentment. And you'll wonder why. Everyone does have to do that. That is a statement of fact. Everyone does have to take that training class if they have this job, or they have to fill out that form, or they have to do that paperwork. Everyone. I was just letting them know that they weren't being targeted. It's not about them. It's just what everyone has to do. Why are they so upset? Now remember that the need for the narcissist to be special is their sort of hedge against their feelings of inadequacy. So when the real world rolls up and asks them to do things that everyone is asked to do, it shatters that sense of specialness, and that is overwhelming for them. So they lash out at whatever or whomever reminded them that they are not. I remember a narcissistic student years ago once taking umbrage with a poor grade that they were receiving in the class. And they really said to me out loud, they said it out loud. They said, well, I just figured since you know I'm so smart that I didn't really have to come and do all these quizzes and stuff. Yes, they really said that out loud. I didn't look up from my desk, and I simply said, the work is required, and the grade stands. The student stormed off, talked smack about me, and I have no doubt that they are currently wreaking havoc somewhere in a workplace out there and ruining other people's lives. Now, you may wonder, if I'm not supposed to say to these folks, isn't that what everyone is supposed to do? Like making it clear to them, what am I exactly supposed to? What should I say to them? Remember, it's all about phrasing. Most of our dealings with narcissistic people is about managing them, walking on the eggshells, and ideally disengaging as quickly as possible. The issue with putting it to a narcissist this way, instead, the issue with saying something like, isn't that what everyone is supposed to do? The problem with that is you're putting it into sort of a rhetorical question framework that forces the narcissist to face down the idea that they are like everyone else. By asking it as a question, in essence, they need to mentally answer it, and they don't like the answer to that question, that, yeah, no, you're not that special, you are like everyone. Believe it or not, and the thing I'm about to tell you may seem a little enably, you may try some statements like this. Things like, yeah, I know it seems tough, and it seems like just one of those things that's a real nuisance, and it wastes precious time, but you know what? Don't think about it. Just get it done. Keep moving forward. Or you could say something like this. Boy, it really sucks, doesn't it? But once you get it done and over with, you can pursue things the way you want because you have such good ideas. Bonus points for pumping up their grandiosity on that one. Or you might even try this. I know the system is just so unfair, isn't it? But you know what? Just give these nincompoops what they want. It's such a waste of your valuable time to fight this. You have so much more to contribute. You get double bonus points for playing into their victimization narrative as well as their grandiosity about how special their time is. You might be thinking, come on, Dr. Ramani, how are they ever going to learn if we all keep saying this? Everyone does have to do this. It is a requirement. How are they going to learn that they aren't special? How are they going to learn that they aren't the exception to the rule? I'll tell you, they're not. They're not going to learn this, not on your watch. If you want to take on the role of the raged at life teacher, then that's on you. And I get it. I understand that. They don't learn, which is why this epidemic of entitlement and rage and frankly, violence and danger in the world at large keeps getting worse. These days, we can't even honk a car horn without fear of an enraged, narcissistic driver assaulting us. We can't tell someone who tries to just walk to the head of the line in a business that there's already a line without fear of starting an all-out attack. when the narcissistic people out there are grumbling about having to do the basic things that are the simple rules of life and how unfair everything is, shrug, give them some lame statement about it really is so awful, and then that you just got to get it done. And also, as a side note, this whole issue that I've brought up in this video can be particularly challenging if them having to do this requirement is something you may need them to do for yourself or your children or your employees. For example, a school form, a financial aid form, workplace paperwork that has to get signed and filled out. At those times, you really need to play their game to get them to do it for no other reason, so that you don't harm other people who have even less power than maybe you do in that situation. But framing it as that it's something that all of the unwashed masses have to do, and that's why they have to do that, it's never a good strategy with a narcissist. Some people feel like, but I feel like I'm being manipulative if I play into their victimization or their grandiosity. It's a fair criticism, and survival isn't always elegant. At best, they are tips. These things I'm telling you are tips to keep the trains running on time and to avoid the wrath of the narcissist, and simply saying what you need to say to get something done or disengage. But if you can avoid it, don't tell them everyone has to do it. You know it. I know it. They're never going to get it, and it ain't worth the fallout to you. In many cases, if a person makes one mistake, does one thing that really bothers us in a relationship, we don't consider it catastrophic. We may be miffed, we may even be really angry, but we hopefully talk it out, and more than anything, they hear us and they change it. Or we may not bring it up and hope it's a one-off. I mean, none of us are perfect, right? Some mistakes are obviously, not everything's that simple. Some mistakes are obviously more in the sort of potentially unforgivable range, like physical abuse or cheating, but let's leave those kinds of big ticket kinds of things off for now. So the person you're in the relationship may keep doing bad things, saying things, and you start feeling increasingly uncomfortable in the relationship. And maybe you do bring things up and you ask for change and you tell them you're hurt and you fight with them. Sadly, if this is in fact a narcissistic relationship and you went through the love bombing stage in any form of idealization, they're little things that will start showing up as more big things and more often in the devalue stage will certainly feel confusing. Trauma bonded stuff may slowly be kicking in too, but you still know what doesn't feel good, and not good feeling stuff may continually pile up. This may not be limited to a romantic relationship. It may also occur in a relationship with a narcissistic family member, where they keep doing and saying not good stuff, or a narcissistic friend. The way this unfolds is that the bad things keep happening. As I said, empathic, healthy, nice people usually don't want to indict people after the other person does or says something bad one time, one day. We may accept their explanations, we may try to make sense of it ourselves, but when it becomes 2 times, 3 times, 20 times, 50 times, every day for years and years, that's a thing. So the day comes when you think you are going to talk about it with them, and you may even feel fortified by the fact that there is a lot of data here, that you have a lot of information to support your point. Months, years, even decades of a pattern. It's not a one-off. Because if you brought up a one-off, certainly any narcissistic person is going to tell you you're being too sensitive. Nobody's perfect, right? But here's the problem, and this is the catch-22, the double bind of the narcissistic relationship. So when you bring up the pattern, stuff that's been happening for months or even years, most narcissistic toxic people will often say to you, oh my gosh, why do you keep bringing up stuff from the past? Gosh, what do you do? Do you write everything down so you can use it against me? You see that catch-22? Bring up something that happens once, and they'll tell you that you're being too critical, too exacting, too unforgiving, that nobody is perfect all the time. Bring up something that has happened many, many, many times, and you're criticized for bringing up the past. And what is even worse is that they may find support in couples therapists, enablers, and other folks who say, yeah, right, healthy relationships can only move forward if we let go of the past. But the past is where all the data on the damn patterns is sitting. And make no mistake, all of this applies to narcissistic families as well. You didn't stand a chance as a kid, but a narcissistic sibling or parent or step-parent or other caregiver or aunt or uncle or other extended family member, let's say they do keep doing the same thing again and again. They've been doing it since childhood, adolescence, you're in adulthood now, and you finally had it, so you say something. And you talk about it. Damn, this is a pattern. The same whatever, criticism, whatever. And you'll often hear, oh, come on now, that's water under the bridge. And yeah, I did something, but that old stuff, why are you bringing that up now? The tricky bit is that this allows them to sidestep the actual issue. They will often deflect to, why do you need to bring up the past? And then the behavior that they're engaging in doesn't get addressed. They don't cop to it, and they don't change it because they have you wondering if you are a petty person for bringing up the past. Take a look at a lot of the relationship advice out there. It always parrots this theme of relationships can only move forward if we don't live in the past. But if the patterns can only be established by bringing up the past, you can see how you're stuck when it's a narcissistic relationship. And since we're told that, well, you don't want to do anything unless it's a pattern, and in these relationships we can't talk about the patterns, not much you can do. And let's keep it real, folks. This could be a very short video. They're not going to change anyhow. Pattern, no pattern, bringing up stuff from the past is in fact pointless. But perhaps you're bringing it up in some hope that with evidence, maybe your argument is stronger. Maybe it just helps you feel more sane. That maybe others around you will support you in what you're pointing out because you're showing, look, this is a pattern. Unfortunately, that is not how narcissistic relationships, families, or systems work. The fact is, this kind of stuff happens in the workplace too, when you will be critiqued for bringing up past stuff. And of course, you'll be looked at with a curious, well, you're still here in the job, so it couldn't have been that bad. And that's what a lot of people will do to in any narcissistic relationship. You say it's a pattern, but you're still here. So how bad was it? Healthy people who make mistakes either self-correct, take accountability when it's pointed out, and above all else, make all attempts to fix it. People in narcissistic relationships hold out hope until they no longer can. And perhaps the hope is that if they have enough heft to their argument, enough data in their argument, that the narcissistic person won't be able to wriggle out. The narcissistic person will always find a way to wriggle out. Patterns do matter. If anything, while bringing up the patterns to a narcissistic person is absolutely worthless and a waste of your time, use it as fuel for your radical acceptance that it is a pattern, that you know the choices that are in front of you. Get out or find the workarounds, and above all, stop blaming yourself. But these relationships are not a world where you can point out a pattern without being gaslighted one more time and be told, oh, you're such a petty person for bringing up the past. No matter what, they're going to call you a petty person. You're a petty person for bringing up something that happened once. You're a petty person for bringing up something that happened yesterday. You're a petty person for bringing up the past. But it can really feel stifling when you're told, look for the pattern. You find the pattern. You can't bring up the pattern. Don't live in the past. Live in the present. Can't bring up one mistake. And all of these reasons are why these relationships can feel so demoralizing and feel like they're hollowing you out. Just wanted to point that out. I have no doubt that more than a few of you have gone through that. So what happened when you set boundaries with a narcissistic person? Because one thing that happens a lot is when people set boundaries with a narcissist, the narcissistic person turns around and calls you the narcissist. The whole issue of setting boundaries in a narcissistic relationship is a very fraught issue Boundaries seem to be viewed as sort of the Swiss Army knife of relationship repair tools, with people believing that everything is better or can be fixed with boundaries. I'm not anti-boundaries. I think they're great, but they simply do not work in toxic or narcissistic relationships. I was recently chatting with someone who was struggling with being called narcissistic in his relationship. He was trying to make a long-term marriage work, but was also tired of feeling as though he was always being taken advantage of. This idea of disengaging was working a little bit, but it was exhausting to have every single aspect of him invalidated and to just sit there and take all of this invalidation and verbal abuse from his spouse. So he decided to set some boundaries. He expressed a few needs. He made some preferences known, nothing fancy. And he was also very clear on what he would and would not do. His spouse turned around and called him selfish and narcissistic. His asks were not that big. He was asking for some time to do some things he needed to do that they needed done for the household. He asked her to take on a few things that would then kind of approximate, not even close, but kind of approximate some equivalence in the household. He asked her to finally show up to a dinner with his elderly and infirm mother, who was actually a nice person. She wasn't narcissistic, but she couldn't hear very well. They weren't particularly interesting dinners. But this was also a woman who was her spouse's mother and who also gave them some financial support years back so they could purchase their first home. And this guy's wife had not shown up to about the past 10 to 12 dinners with this mother. He was immensely frustrated. Everyone, the books, the Instagram, the therapist, set boundaries. And he felt that what he did wasn't even setting a boundary. It was merely asking for some very basic things that were on his mind. If he was really setting a boundary, he might have done something like asked her to stop spending excessively from a joint account on frivolous items for the house they didn't discuss, or to stop using disparaging language with him, or to stop talking with their friends about a health issue he had and that he had asked her to not talk about it. That would be setting a boundary. This whole just set a boundary conversation for people in narcissistic relationships needs to stop. It once again puts the onus on the person enduring the relationship and, in essence, asking them to go on a guaranteed to fail mission. But then you toss this part on top of it, because guess what she said to him when he made those asks? She told him he was a narcissist. So if you do attempt to set a boundary, they're going to tell you that you're the selfish one, you're demanding, you're the narcissist. And for a lot of people going through these relationships, that can feel like a setback. Many people in narcissistic relationships doubt themselves. They question themselves. They blame themselves. So it's plausible to a person in a narcissistic relationship that they are indeed themselves narcissistic if they attempt to do something like make a need known or set a small boundary. These relationships are about the slow fading of you, the negation of you. It only works if you fully sacrifice your sense of self and your needs to the relationship. You can see how this can be particularly pernicious if this is a parent-child dynamic. The child doesn't have the option of boundaries, and over time, they get the message that, hey kid, you exist for the parent, but not for yourself. Not exactly ripe ground for a child to learn how to set boundaries. So even years later, if that's how you grow up, and you attempt to set boundaries with that very parent like this, you're going to be told that you're selfish or bad or entitled or whatever way they try to hit you to keep you subjugated, to keep you silenced. But if a relationship in adulthood is your first time at the narcissism rodeo, you may think that you are merely dealing with selfishness with a touch of manipulativeness. Narcissism happens to you slowly. You are still in the afterglow of the love bomb, or feeling like you are in something special. And the awful behavior slowly creeps in the back door. So the day you attempt to do what the books tell you to do, all the books about relationships, and you set a boundary, you're going to be hit with the unpleasant and inaccurate idea that you're the narcissistic one, you're the problem, you're the needy one, you're the one who's difficult. When you exert your true self in a narcissistic relationship, when you attempt to create any kind of balance in it, they will find a way to shut that down. And shaming you is a surefire way to do that. You can go ahead and set those boundaries if you wish, but be prepared to be told that you are the one with the problem. Your strongest stance may be just say, okay, sure, if that's how you see me, I can't change that. And I still expect you to stop talking to me that way. You know you aren't those things they're telling you. You've got to keep reminding yourself that. But for them to do that, it's a power move for them. Take that power back. Setting boundaries, not possible in these relationships, but when you do put your foot in there and they clap back with the idea that you're narcissistic, take a minute, recognize this is a common play for them, and don't listen. Now, here's something that has come up over and over again, not just even with clients I've talked with and people I've just spoken with generally, but even in emails, which is people saying, I get it, I know I'm not supposed to engage, but you know what? I want to speak my truth to the narcissist. Why don't I get a chance? And people get mad at me. They're like, please don't tell me to not engage. I want to speak my truth to the narcissistic person in my life. So let's break that down, because you're right. You have every right to do that. Now, I hear this often. People say, I know, don't engage, don't defend, don't explain, don't call them out, don't tell them you think that you're a narcissist, blah, blah, blah. I know, I keep saying it. It's deeply unsatisfying. So many of you say, I just want them to know, I want them to hear this. I absolutely hear you. I get it. And many people will say to me, this is so BS. It is unfair. It is unjust. Why do these narcissistic people get to go through life and make a mess of everything and everyone's lives and hurt people and say whatever they want, but nobody ever tells them what they're doing? Listen, you can do what you want. You can tell them, but alas, you cannot make them listen. You can say whatever you want. My goal in my work here is not just to provide education, but also to protect survivors of narcissistic abuse. So my simplistic don't engage and don't call them out, it's actually a little more nuanced than that. There are a few fundamental truths you need to remember. First, narcissists don't care. They don't care about you. They don't care about the next person. They don't care. So when you talk to them and tell them something they don't want to hear, they aren't going to sit up straight and listen because they value you and want to hear from you. They don't care. The only thing they care about is the image they put forth to the world, not about you. Second, they don't like being told that they are wrong or bad or that they did something bad. It activates their shame, and after that, their shame gets activated, they rage, and they still keep doing bad things because they don't learn. So when you call them out or engage with them or let them know of your disapproval, they will rage and gaslight and criticize you and devalue you, and it doesn't feel good. People dealing with narcissistic people want the impossible. They want to be able to share their truth or give honest feedback and have the narcissistic person listen to it and get it and maybe even implement it. That is not an option. It's not going to happen. I am trying to protect you from the further invalidation that happens when you take the leap of faith and share your truth and are met with such knee-buckling rage that it may actually trigger past traumas for you, and it's not good for you to be exposed to that. And on top of that, you now need to manage the disappointment, the inevitable disappointment, of them not hearing what you said, which after watching this channel you should get that they will not get that. However, it is a human need to want to speak your truth. It is for this reason that courts allow for example, victims' statements that crime victims or their families can make to perpetrators of crimes. People want their pain to be heard by the perpetrators, and I completely understand that. But if you are going to do that with a narcissistic person, may I suggest some steps you can take first. Number one, figure out what your long-term plan is with this narcissistic relationship. Are you going to stay in it, leave in it, stay in it and gray rock, stay in it and hope it gets better? This long-term vision is essential. If you are going to stay in any form in this relationship, then truth speaking may not be your best play. If you speak your truth, you're showing your hand and creating more antagonism in an already bad situation. If you're going to leave, it's a different story. Number two, get your ducks in line. That may mean in an intimate relationship, waiting until after a divorce, or you find a new place to live. That may mean in a family to figure out how you will continue to interact with other family members or address any unfinished issues that may need to be addressed. If this is a workplace, ensure that you've documented everything, that you've found new employment, or dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. Do not speak your truth in any of these situations while things are unfolding, because it's really going to stop your forward motion. Number three, get your truth organized. Write your truth down, make notes, practice in front of the mirror. Just be prepared. The fight, flight, freeze, fawn thing means that we may be as erudite as Abraham Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address in front of our bathroom mirror, and then freeze like a deer in the headlights when we see the narcissist. You want to be, if you're going to speak it, be ready. And number four, that means be prepared. Do not go in with any cinematic expectation that they're going to say, oh, wow, thanks for sharing your truth and thanks for clearing that up. I so appreciate your insights and I am going to work to be better and treat you the way you deserve. That's not going to happen. You need to go in knowing that what you're about to do will result in rage and bluster and word salad and abuse and a general mess. If you can get these 4 steps clear in your head and you just feel you want to release it, you just feel like it would be good for you to speak your truth, and you don't care about the rage and the invalidation and the gaslighting and the verbal abuse, but after preparing and getting where you need to be, then you do you. I have seen people who get all the way through these relationships. They endure torturous divorces, horrific family showdowns, or traumatic workplace situations. And at the end, they just speak their truth. After they spoke their truth, they were typically mocked or screamed at or gaslighted or minimized. But at the end of speaking their truth, they said, I don't regret it. They said, I knew this narcissistic person wasn't going to change, but I just needed to say it once. One time I needed to share my hurt, my disgust, and my pain. I needed to point out to them that I saw the things that happened. I always tell people, if you are going to speak your truth, try to avoid the name calling. Just speak your own truth, your own feelings. If you just start spewing a lot of name calling, profanity-laced diatribes, and listen, I completely, no judgment if you do that. I completely get it if you do that. But if you do it, you sometimes lose the chance to do that thing you headed in to do, to just share how you felt, your truth. If you attack them, then you're playing their dirty ground game and they almost feel like you're in their dirty ground club. Many people who do it, they do say they felt better. They feel like they released their truth and then they walked away. The narcissistic person did exactly what they expected, raged or whatever, but the person speaking truth didn't care. They just wanted to release their truth. Everyone out there has the right to speak their truth. The problem is that with narcissistic people, many people beg and plead and so much want closure or resolution. That option is not on the menu, but releasing it by speaking it is absolutely okay. I have worked with numerous people And I've most often encountered it in family situations and in relationship situations. One case in particular, somebody had gone through a horrific divorce that spanned years and years and years. And for some reason, everything was done, everything was signed, and I think they were just handling some last minute matters, and was in front of the person, and the narcissistic person, who again put this person through a nightmare, said one little thing, and she just let it rip. And she said the whole time, I think Dr. Ramani would say, this is wrong. Dr. Ramani would say, this is not right. And she said, I knew he wasn't going to get it. I knew all of it. And after I did it, she's like, he just went at me. But she said, after I knew I couldn't say it during the divorce proceedings, I knew I couldn't say it during other times this was happening because harm to her would have been too risky. But she said, when there was no more stakes and I no longer had skin in the game of any kind, I just needed to let it go. And she said, I felt like I laid down a burden. And in a way, what she said was fascinating. He is such a malignant narcissist that his response to her was so cruel, so dehumanizing, so invalidating, that after she spoke her truth to see what he really was about, she said in a way it was almost reassuring. It really showed her that she had made the right decision. Like I said, I caution any of you who are going to stay in these relationships, not so sure speaking truth really makes sense. This is definitely a sort of like a last soliloquy before you close the curtain. This is where you might just say, I'm done. Or it might be that one time, it's not like you say, I'm letting you all know I'm leaving. It's just that one time you say, I just need you, I'm going to say this once. I don't even need you to hear it. I just need to say it. And someone says there's something psychologically meaningful about not just saying it into a mirror or to a friend or to a therapist, but having that person in a room, that narcissistic person who hurt you. And I promise you that narcissistic person's going to be doing a lot of like this, a lot of this, a lot of that. And it's disgusting and contemptuous. Doesn't matter. They were in that room while you spoke your truth. In a way you can release it and let it go. But this strategy is not for everyone. And like I said, if you're going to stay, not so good. Hope this helps. Thanks again.